Well, today on the channel, I have a treat for you. We have some basically immediate reaction from a Big 12 AD on what he thinks of Bob Bowlsby stepping down as Big 12 commissioner, plus what he wants to see the league do with Bob Bowlsby's replacement. And I'll give you a hint, it is not what the Pac 12 and the Big 10 decided to do with their commissioners. Welcome in, I am John Kurtz. Here on this channel, you get Big 12 content. We talk Big 12 football and basketball, obviously with a Big 12 slant on everything here. Follow me on Twitter at JLKurtz. You can support the channel on Venmo, John-Kurtz-4. So, you know the news now. If you watched my video yesterday, you got the instant reaction, all the details on Bob Bowlsby. He will be stepping down this year as Big 12 commissioner. Within the next 90 days, the league wants to have the new hire in place. There is a nugget later on in this video about Bob Bowlsby's role after that. It sounded like it would be more as a consultant in the release the Big 12 put out. Sounds like that's not quite so much the case. But I was very curious what the reaction would be around the league to this news. And I have a relationship with Gene Taylor, K-State's athletic director from my time working on the beat for 10 years in Manhattan. I had a chance to catch up with him actually for the podcast that I do on Kansas City Sports Network and got a little bit of insight from him about Bob Bowlsby, where things stand, and where he wants to see the league go. So I'll let you listen to that, and then we'll react on the other side. How long had you known that this was coming down the pipe, that Bob would be stepping away?
About 24 hours. I was at the Final Four. I had actually just seen Bob, and we were going to try to get together for a beverage. And then my president called and said, "Hey, the news is coming out tomorrow. Just wanted to give you the heads up." And I wasn't so sure that Bob wasn't trying to maybe give me a heads up, but there were a bunch of people around me when they ran into him. So, I didn't see it coming. You know, I had heard, that about a couple of years ago he was talking about, and I saw his presser or his press conference or something, said he, been looking for, an off ramp here for a couple of years. I thought, he was worn pretty thin during the whole conference transition. A couple of days, but I think he recovered from that, recovered very well, in my opinion. But I don't know. I just think maybe some frustrations of, the expansion or the lack of expansion in the college football playoff. Maybe just said, you know what, if it works for the Big 12 and, he's done a lot of the homework already and a lot of the legwork to get us where we are. And maybe it's time. I haven't talked to him yet. I reached out to him via text, but we'll see him a couple of times. We've got a few more meetings the next 30 days. So I'm looking forward to continuing to work with him as long as we can. Bob's a tremendous person. I've been a big fan of his, and just really wish him the best. And I'm sure he'll land somewhere, probably making some money being a consultant for somebody.
Yeah, what are you guys most looking for in the replacement for him? Do you feel like?
I don't know what the president's. Obviously, that's a presidential decision. I think that we need somebody that understands the Big 12. I'd prefer personally a person that's currently in college athletics, either a sitting AD like the ACC did. I'm a little concerned that somebody coming from outside college athletics, particularly that's been sitting in the business either as a commissioner or an AD, that I'll be honest, a couple of the new commissioners, I'm not so sure it's going to take them a while to get caught up in everything. And yet, Bob had so much experience, right? He'd been an AD at Iowa, been an AD at Stanford. And I thought he brought to the table, what Greg Sankey brings to the table, and, Jim Delaney and those guys. I think we need that kind of background to fill Bob's role.
So a couple of things here. Two main reactions that I have. One, the point that he has about not wanting to go the route of the Pac-12 with George Kliavkov, who was working with the MGM Grand in Vegas before they hired him as the commissioner. And then the other being Kevin Warren of the Big Ten, who had a law background, was working with the Vikings before coming into the college athletics world with the Big Ten. Sounds like that's obviously not where Gene Taylor would like to see the Big 12 go. I had a different spin on that yesterday. I thought, hey, this may be the time to get creative if the league is going to have to get creative as how it brands itself as a whole. Now, that was with the knowledge and thought process that, hey, Bob Bowlsby would be there potentially as a consultant. Again, Dennis Dodd from CBS Sports Today really stressed that Bowlsby doesn't really want it to be a consultant role, just a, hey, call me in case of emergency kind of a thing. So that does change the calculus a little bit. And if you are Gene Taylor, this is somebody who's worked in college athletics for a long time. His entire career has been in college athletics. It would make sense that you're going to be more inclined to support that kind of a candidate and that kind of a guy in that role. But even beyond that, let's think about Gene Taylor and his profile. This is a guy who worked on the College Football Playoff Selection Committee this past year, which means he was in a room, basically locked inside a room for hours on end with ADs and other administrators from around the country. Presumably, those that are working with Pac-12 Commissioner George Kliavkoff, Big Ten Commissioner Kevin Warren, and all the fallout from it, college football playoff expansion, how that fell apart. You can just imagine that he has a pretty good idea of what it was like to work with those guys, and he's hearing some of the complaints and things from his colleagues in other leagues. I would imagine that also really factors in here to his opinion on that he must be hearing from some folks that there are really some growing pains. And I mean, frankly, we can look at some of that. Everybody wondered, why did Kevin Warren sign up for the Alliance? That didn't do anything for the Big Ten. It was just helping a couple of other leagues. That seemed to be a misstep. Maybe that's one of those things where he needed a little bit more seasoning. Kevin Warren in the Big Ten jumping the gun on COVID and not having a season, right? That's another thing. And George Kliavkoff just generally being all over the place when it comes to playoff expansion, kind of floating like something in the wind, like some dust in the wind, is really what it felt like Kliavkoff's positions were during a lot of that process. So maybe that is factoring into it. Now, the other part of this is, if you take his comments at face value, Gene Taylor's that is, he didn't have any real idea about this happening, at least that it would be a for sure thing happening, until very close to when it actually did. Which would tell you that this wasn't all that premeditated necessarily, or at least the word had not gotten out to everybody across the league. That's, again, if you take it at face value, but I lend some credibility to it, especially when Taylor says that he heard a couple of years ago Bowlsby may be looking to get out. So it's not like the whole idea of him wanting to get out was completely out of left field. And the Dennis Dodd article that I mentioned from CBS Sports actually really provided some more insight along those same lines about where Bowlsby's head is at. And it kind of backs up what I was saying yesterday. I figure the reasons Bowlsby's leaving, he's 70. I'm sure he's financially secure at this point in his career. He's dealing with a ton and has dealt with a ton over the last couple of years between COVID and conference realignment. Who would want to put up with it? No normal human being would want to put up with that at this point. And I didn't even get into all the other changes that have happened in college athletics, like NIL, the transfer portal, et cetera, et cetera. It is a much different world than what he walked into. And that's what Dennis Dodd's article really kind of validates here, where he starts with a quote from a source that says, quote, "He's getting like a lot of us," he being Bob Bowlsby, "he's getting like a lot of us," said one colleague. "He's frustrated. Everyone at the administrator level is dealing with the uncertain nature of college athletics, a world which now includes name, image, and likeness, the transfer portal, and player empowerment, all while the authority of the NCAA is slowly but surely diminishing. This is not the version of college athletics that Bowlsby or his peers signed up to lead." More from the article here. The pressure didn't end there. As it turns out, the work he put in to expand the playoff was a waste of time as well. The migrations of Texas and OU to the SEC created divisions and suspicions among the leadership that exist to this day. There may be expansion in 4 years at the earliest, but it will be without Bowlsby leading the Big 12. It was a bit agonizing to watch it all unfold. Well, think about some of the coaches we've seen leave the game lately, right? Like Roy Williams, Coach K in college basketball. And Roy Williams specifically mentioned how much things had changed. You can feel things changing on Coach K as well as he started to age out of this process. Like, it is something that I think a lot of these older coaches are not as keen to deal with. I dealt with Bruce Weber at K-State. He was very hesitant to come around on the transfer portal, and I would say was a couple years late really on hitting it hard, because that was not the way he was used to doing things. And just amplify that times 10 if you're a commissioner that's having to deal with all these schools and bigger picture issues in Texas and Oklahoma. And are we headed for a super conference? Like, these are all things that, yes, Bowlsby definitely did not sign up for. Here's more from Dennis Dodd's article. Quote, "This hasn't been all roses at this stage in his life personally," said Texas Tech President Lawrence Chauvinet, current chair of the Big 12 Presidents. He spoke to the fact that he wanted to spend more time with his wife and children and grandchildren. "I sat with him in San Diego at the NCAA tournament first round site with 2 of his grandchildren. He was just beaming." Now, I think in some cases you can see that kind of quote and be like, all right, just brush it off. Like, that's just kind of a nice little PR spin. Of course, he wants to go spend more time with the family. But I don't know, Bowlsby strikes me as somebody where that does actually make sense here. And when you combine it with all the extra work that's being lumped on his plate, that's just, most humans would not want to deal with that at 70. And we think of coaches, they can be wired differently and want to go the Bill Snyder route and just coach until the very bitter end, the Joe Paterno route, coach until the very bitter end. But I'm not sure administrators are necessarily going to be wired quite that same way, like that unbelievably hyper-competitive nature that lives inside you that makes you want to keep pushing even when you have to deal with all that stuff when you're that age. I think most normal humans do not want to deal with that and would start to become more open to the idea of, hey, let me just go hang out with my children and grandchildren. So, listen, I can understand that certainly from Bowlsby. Now, here is the part from Dennis Dodd's article that was news, and I already had to allude to it earlier because of its relevancy in the conversation, but it says Bowlsby is not poised to consult in retirement. This is it. He told a colleague recently that they can call him as long as it doesn't become a routine. The old wrestler is hanging up the singlet. Bowlsby, of course, a wrestler back in his college days. But that's information that seems to be different than the way the Big 12 had kind of spun things in the release, where it made it seem like Bowlsby would stay on in more of a consulting type of role. So honestly, that brings me back to Gene Taylor's first point about wanting someone with experience in college athletics. Make a little more sense that you want to have a seasoned veteran in the college athletic game if the case is Bowlsby's not going to be around as much to actually help out with the new commissioner, right? So you need somebody that knows the ropes a little bit more. I can understand now more that point of view than I did yesterday. I think that's a very important detail when it comes to the Big 12 because I felt like, look, if you have kind of the best of both worlds, like new, different thinking, forward thinking, progressive commissioner combined with Bowlsby, the elder statesman, still being there to give advice, that seems like a hell of a combo. You may have to differentiate it and do things differently now if this is in fact the truth, which I have no reason to not believe Dennis Dodd, obviously, here on this. So that's an important note. But let me know what you think in the comments. Are you glad Bowlsby's gone? Are you worried about the future of the Big 12? Hit me up. Let me know in the comments. Like the video. All that really helps. If you want to donate to the channel and help out, it's John-Kurtz-4 on Venmo. Should be going live tomorrow night. Wanted to get you this tape content because of the timeliness here today. Appreciate all of you guys who watch, and take care.